committee that is now morphed into SkillsFuture. She's a member of the council, as well as Senior Minister of State at Ministry of Education and Law. If I may start on a personal note, I mean, there are all kinds of policies that the government has been rolling out over the past few years. And every policy, there are always trade-offs and pluses and minuses, and it's a matter of fine-tuning. But personally, there is no policy that has been rolled out over the past few years which I feel as strongly about as Aspire, because it is ultimately about, as I said in my opening remarks, about bringing up everybody. It's giving everyone in Singapore a stake. So your future depends not only on how you began, but what you can become. And that transition is of great significance. But it is also one reason why this policy is not merely about systems you put in place, though that's important, not merely about programs and policies, but though that is important, but it is about a cultural shift. And I might begin by asking our guest of honor what she sees in our culture that poses an impediment to making this shift. It's a big question, but I think fundamentally we all know that that is what is the biggest challenge that we face.
Well, first I must thank Janadas IPS for having me here and giving me the opportunity to speak with all of you. Also to ITE for letting us have these wonderful premises. If I may just address Janadas's question in a slightly different way, because Janadas asked the question this way. He said, what are the impediments? Which essentially means you're starting off on a negative. I generally don't like to start off on negatives because, that just becomes a wrong focal point. Let's start off with what was Aspire intended to achieve, and then what are the potential challenges for that. At the end of the day, Aspire, now SkillsFuture, is really about two things. You look at it from the individual viewpoint, you look at it from the country's viewpoint. From an individual's viewpoint, what is it that every individual wants, whether it be a student or parent? If you're a parent, you want the best for your child. If you're the student, you want the best for yourself. If you're a working person, you basically want to get achievement, fulfillment in your career. You want to be somebody, right? And what has happened over the last decade or two is really the chase for the qualifications or the credentials. And it has become as though that is the only way to achieve what you want. What do people want? They want a decent income. They want job fulfillment. They want to be seen by others as, somebody who has some standing, some social status of some sort. And over the years, it became seen as the degree is the only way to get that. And actually, that's not how a degree started out. The degree is supposed to be a means to an end, not an end in itself. And I think over the last 15, 20 years, it's started to become an end in itself. So the question really for our committee was, how do you achieve those objectives which the individual, the parents and society wants? Income, the good job, the status. And does it always necessarily have to be via the degree? And when we looked at it in detail, we realized that the answer is actually no, it doesn't have to always be by a degree. A degree is one way, but there are other ways. Because at the end of the day, when you look at it from the industry viewpoint and the country's viewpoint, what do industries need? Employers will tell you they need people with skills. And skills encompasses a whole range, because skills just doesn't mean a technician or a welder or somebody who's doing construction work. Any one of you who wants to go to an unskilled surgeon or an unskilled lawyer is going to find yourself, in trouble quite rapidly. You do not want to do that. So when we say skills, people tend to assume it means blue collar. It doesn't. Skills really means being very good at whatever it is you're doing. Then the next question is, what kind of jobs should you be doing? And industries will tell you there's a whole range. And as a country, we also need a whole range. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. And as we looked at it in depth, we saw that, well, there are actually many ways to progress. One is you get, one is the degree route. That's the most commonly sort of sought after route. But equally valuable is getting the poly diploma and working, and either just rely on your work experience to proceed further, or get professional qualifications, or if it's really necessary, go get a degree later. I mean, there are various examples, but one thing really impressed me about the ITE alumni, and someday you should meet them, is a good many of them are actually owners of their own businesses. And all of them told me that their early start in vocational education and training, that hands-on approach, really helped them to become, to understand the business and to be able to own a business. And when they talked to their suppliers and their vendors and their business partners, they really knew what they were talking about. They didn't know it just because they read it in some textbook. They knew it because they'd done it, and they knew the practical difficulties, and that's why they are entrepreneurs and owners of their businesses. So that's the big picture. In other words, there are many ways to progress and achieve those things that you want, but one big challenge, and that's what I think Chandas was alluding to, is mindset. Because we really are, I think, dealing with how many thousand years of Confucian philosophy or approach, where the scholar is at the top of the chain, and the guy who's doing stuff with his hands is much further down now. And in between you have the warrior and you have all the others, right? And so when people compare or make comparisons with Germany or with Switzerland, it is not easy to make a direct comparison, because in Europe, the idea of being a master craftsman or a tradesperson actually carries a very high status in society. The idea of the guilds and craftsmen were people who were basically community and society leaders. So I think that it's the biggest challenge is the mindset. The challenge is not the learning of the skills, which government provide the funding. You have ITEs, you have polys, but it's really that approach or the thinking and being able to make that shift and to realize that there is value in the different types of jobs that we do. Just because you're working with your hands, just because you're on an oil rig, just because you're a technician on the floor, what you do is no less important than somebody who's sitting behind a desk or somebody who's doing something, an office job. It takes a whole range to make this country tick. So I'm not sure if that's answered your question, Jandas.
Yes. I mean, it's not as though we haven't made these kinds of cultural shifts before. When we began national service, I remember in 1967 they used to say, the Chinese saying, right? I mean, you don't make nails, from nails out of good iron, and just as you don't make soldiers out of good men, you don't make nails out of, but now you have the SAF being the sort of preferred career choice of our best students. If I may open the floor to the questions to the floor. There are 2 mics. Who would want to ask the first? Please, go ahead. Oh, there are 3 mics, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you for mentioning the IT alumni. I'm actually from the IT alumni. Right. Earlier on...
Do you own your own company?
Sorry?
Do you own your own company?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
My name, thank you. Basically, what you said is actually true. Earlier on, we have a panel of speakers before you came. Mr. Chu from Keppel graduated from Raffles Institution, and of course he mentioned that not many of his classmates from Raffles Institution work in the Keppel shipyard industry, because most of them prefer to be in law, investment banking, and working for the civil service. Most of them do not want to dirty their hands, But I graduated from Aljunied Vocational Institute along Mata Road, previously called Persiarang Kelingling. They changed it to Circuit Road. All right. During that particular time, I would like to share is this, Dr. Law Song Sing mentioned, the success of the IT education boils to one fundamental result: ability to find jobs for our people. And I would like to attest this. 40 years ago, when I graduated from IT, I went to Makino, the precision engineering company. I went for interview, rank Xerox, went to one semiconductor factory. You know, every job I go to, I was offered a job. And I have to write letter to them and turn down the job. so it's, I remember it very, very well. And we have got, you know, the Dr. Tay Soon's vision of technical education. During that time, about 20 years old, not sure what is it about, but now, closing to 60 years old, I begin to understand the impact of that particular technical education and what Aspire is going to change. It's going to be a game changer, as what the speakers have mentioned. And I want to attest that it is correct, that the route is actually moving towards that. And the challenge is for Associate Professor Irene Ng to do more research, to do a hypothetical testing. I'm an IT graduate, so I don't understand research, but I understand basic hypothetical testing to say that, is it true graduates with hands-on, hearts-on, minds-on, chances of being successful as entrepreneurship is there? I guess it cuts across all countries. And Minister, you mentioned about the mindset. It's very, very important. It takes a long time. You know, earlier on, Mr. Chu from Keppel mentioned, you know, our young people do not like to get our hands dirty, right? The only way, you know, our graduates, IT or poly graduates, will get successful in their life is because we don't mind to get our hands dirty, because that's our training. It's part of our training. You know, I stayed in the US for a couple of years. You know, the technician that come to my apartment in the US, in California, when they do a job, they are very proud. You know, they fix up the things in my kitchen. After that, they will clean it, they'll sweep it. You know, they feel so proud that even though it's a blue-collar job, they are so proud of their ability to do it so well. So that attests to it. And before I conclude, I want to ask my fellow alumni, Mr. Bob Lee. Hi. Please say something. You are from alumni. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. No pressure.
I'm the chairman of Makono Holding Private Limited. I'm very proud to be a student of ITE, and all the training we receive is a passion that we want to return back in terms of our experience. So therefore, our commitment in terms of our experience back to IT and to the students, to motivate them that IT graduates is not the end of the road. There is many, many future ahead. It's all depending on your mindset, your determination, right? Everything is there waiting for you. There is no such thing as the end of the road, right? So therefore, doesn't mean that IT is a school that is no future, right? It's all depends on the individual. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be something special, you know, or any relationship with the government, as long as your mind is very positive, right? So this is something
that in itself is something special,
yeah,
to have that positive mindset.
There is something that every one of us should have, you know, in terms of achieving the goal. So I'm trying to say is that I'm very proud of ITE. Thank you.
I think you can, one thing that comes across clearly from the IT alumni is that sense of resilience, that sense of searching for the opportunity and carving out your destiny, if you like, or your future, or your career. And I think that that's what makes them special. And I think that not enough stories of IT alumni and graduates have been heard. And it's probably worthwhile for us to get to know more about the path that has been taken by people who have come out from ITE and our early vocational institutes, because that is a story less well known. And I think that when other Singaporeans get to hear and know of these stories, it will shape the way that they think about technical education.
You wanted to ask a question? Yes, go ahead.
Morning, Minister. Thank you. This has been a very insightful morning all around. I think one of the points that was raised earlier is in the Singapore that we have today in the education system, we are becoming a little bit more segmented into the more desirable schools, the less desirable schools, and so on. But it's really an academic segmentation, essentially. There's an academic ability. So it's entirely possible that somebody could have the capabilities of going to university and being a lawyer and so forth, but maybe their true passions are in animation. Do we think that there could be someday when students who go to the quote-unquote the good schools, make a conscious decision to say, well, I'm going to go actually to an IT program instead because that's where my true passions lie?
That would be, I think, the ultimate. I think we're not quite there yet, but we are moving some way towards that. And why do I say that? I say that because there are quite a number of students who, after O-levels, qualify for junior college but have actually chosen to go a poly route. And when you ask them why, many times their answer is that they actually think that they will learn more practical or hands-on knowledge, and that interests them. And I think the truth of the matter is that there is room and scope for all kinds. Let me just explain a little bit about what we've been trying to do at MOE. We've been trying to rebalance and correct, I think, that skewing towards the purely academic achievement. But at the same time in doing that, we also have to be very careful that people don't receive the message that academics are not important at all. So it seems to have this binary swing, It's like, on the one hand, degrees are everything, and then on the other hand, degrees don't matter, and kids are going back telling their parents, minister says I don't have to study anymore, which is not true. What do you want to make sure is that in the primary years, they get a strong, solid foundation, and they do have to have a solid foundation in English, math, science. That one is basic. You cannot run away from that. And of course, for us, mother tongue is important too, because mother tongue speaks to identity, it speaks to your culture, it speaks to your ethnicity. So those are the four basic things. But as you get into secondary, you can start to specialize a bit more. And it's also clear that there are some students who are very much academically inclined, and they just really love studying. And you let them, they'll study for the rest of their lives. And then there's some who, they just want to do stuff. You lock them up in the room, and they're just not happy with that. And there's some who are very artistic, then there's some who, clearly very literary, and there's some who love their maths and science. And we need all of them. In order to have a country that is flourishing at all levels, you want engineers, you want doctors, you want lawyers, but you also want artists, you want, now Singapore cooks are getting really good. We've been winning the World Skills in the spa, in the spa category. We've done quite well in several other categories as well, but we need all of these. So our education system should actually let all of these flower, and it should be seen as, if you get on one path, it doesn't mean that you're precluded from another path. It means that you basically explore the path that you are able to go to, but you also hope that there are jobs at the end of the day. So let me just explain a little bit more about what we're doing at the university level as well. We've got our traditional universities, NTU, SMU, and NUS, SUTD, which are more of the research universities. But coming on stream, we also have SIT, which is going to be more of an applied university, meaning much more hands-on. Just to give you an example, when we visited SIT the other day, those students in their accountancy course, in their first semester, they've already gone on internship. These are poly accountancy grads. So the university actually takes into account what they have learned at the poly stage. And because they've gotten the foundations and the basics, the university feels that actually they can start straight off with their internship, which means that what they're learning at the university level is very much geared towards what the market requires, and their curriculum is actually very practical. And then we've got UNISIM that will come on stream as well. And UNISIM is also going to be an applied university, but not just applied. It will be positioned much more as an adult learning university because they have, a lot of experience in that. They've got part-time courses for people who are already working. So you can see that now there are many options, and you don't even have to be studying for a full degree. You can take some of it part-time, because that part-time course happens to supplement what you are doing in your work, and it's valuable for your work, but you don't need a full degree for that. So the landscape is becoming very variegated. But again, because it's becoming variegated, it's also not easy for everybody to absorb all of this information and to see the big picture. So we're ultimately trying to get towards a system where basically it's a little bit like it's like ladders, you can climb up this ladder, you can pause here, then if you choose, you walk along and then you climb up another ladder, or there's some people who just take a ladder, goes straight to the top, and then you get off there. It's just different strokes for different folks.
Please. I'd like to discuss something about the adult education from the technical point of view. As a society in Singapore, I think if you go overseas to Australia, to England, to Europe, you find that the homeowner will be very proud to say, "Oh, I built this, I did this." But in Singapore, I bought this, I bought that. So they say this thing is a bit wobbly, but I can't repair it. I can't get a technician to repair it. So not only can they not do it, they can't get people to do it. So I know in certain countries they have adult education schemes where, for example, the IT places like the Vocational Institute, they can conduct adult education classes. Put out your hand, those who want to, if there's a course called home repair, anybody want to learn? So many people would like to do that, but they aren't. I think in those days, earlier days, there were adult education training, but now there don't seem to be any. I hope something, I don't know whether Aspire or somebody can look into it, but I hope ITE can open its doors for evening classes for adults, for people who are working to practice this. I'm a retiree, and my hobby is carpentry. I have parents telling me, I say, why do you teach my children carpentry? I've conducted 5 classes, 7 to 12-year-old primary school kids, and then also secondary school kids, 12 to 15 on carpentry. They spend 4 half days learning how to do work. And after one day, one of the 9-year-old girl told her mother, "Oh, Mom, I learned so much." She said, "What do you learn?" "I learned how to hammer a nail, I learned how to saw a piece of wood, and I learned how to drill a hole." So that's after one day. But after 4 days, she could make a little box, and she was so proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's for continuing education.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good suggestion. Let us look into it and see what we can do. I'm not sure which one is the best institution to do it, but that idea of being able to learn such skills, I think, is quite important. I had to do technical when I was in secondary school. In fact, my school was a bit unique because we had to do home econs and technical. So for some reason, my technical was much better than my home econs because my rock cakes really were like rocks. And when we had to sew nightgowns, I remember I managed to sew the entire thing inside out. So all my seams were hanging on the outside. Metalwork was fine, but woodwork particularly challenging. I was always planing against the grain, and it was always breaking off. So I was in despair of my teacher. So that's now you know why I did law.
So when did you begin to make shoes?
Much later, after I joined MOE.
Yes.
Maybe I can in response to the gentleman there, you'll be happy to note that under our new strategic plan, part of the plan is to also open ITE for more personal development. So if you want to bake a cake, you want to repair your aircon, you know, you want to service your car, you know, just for the fun of it, you know, or maybe, you know, want to teach your grandchildren, you know, how to do things, ITE is the place. We'll offer more courses, you know, with this new strategic plan.
I can come for remedial classes for...
You want to bake your cakes, you can come here.
Yes. Please, Irene.
Maybe I'd like to offer a slightly different angle to what has been shared, which is with all this self-learning, I think in the Western countries, why is it that you have to do it yourself? Is because it's so expensive to hire a carpenter or a technician. So maybe the question is about the other aspect of Aspire or the development of technical jobs, the wage restructuring correction. And a slightly different but related point is we have heard stories from ITA alumni who have made it. I wonder whether Aspire also collected stories from, say, IT dropouts or the others who, what are their aspirations? Yeah.
Okay. There are a couple of things or a few points. One about wages, and then the others about those who don't do so well, right? Okay. On wages, I think market will pay for where it sees value. And I think in the last decade or so, where it's been easy to get foreign labor, the instinct of industries, right, is to go for lowest cost. I think that is changing. It's changing, and certainly we've been tightening up on foreign labor as well. So you've got to do these things in tandem. And you've also got to make sure that if we want to ensure that the wages go up, one, that you have solid skills the industry is prepared to pay for, but industry must also be prepared to invest in their people and make sure that they are, looked after and that you train them properly. So part of the recommendations from Aspire were that, you see, we considered whether you do a full apprenticeship system. We realized that you can't, partly because parents don't really see their children as being employees immediately after they leave school. So when they come out O-levels and you ask them to be an apprentice and thus an employee, I think that society is not quite ready for that. At least our society isn't. You say that in Germany, in Switzerland, it's quite accepted. But here, I think a bit different. So our recommendation was, if you want to make sure that the students acquire deeper skills, then internship is the way to go. But after they graduate and they start work, there is definitely also, from the employers as well as the young employees' viewpoint, a desire to learn more so that they can continue to upskill even as they are working. So that's where the place and train, or earn as you learn sort of scheme came in. So what we're looking at is, after they graduate and hopefully remain in the same industry for which they're trained, we'll have schemes where they can come back to the ITE or to the poly to do the theoretical learning to supplement what they are doing in the workplace. And because that also adds value, hopefully that will bring the wages up and close some of the gap with the big gap that we see now. So it's a combination. You can't say to an employer, just pay more. The employer will say, I'll pay more if I am sure that I will get more or get something more. And at the same time, it's a demand and supply issue. We have found that the salaries for ITE graduates, I think, have been going up in the last few years, and that's an encouraging sign. So you've got to work at it from this angle. And also, once they're actually inside the company, we really hope that companies and employers will adopt progressive practices where you allow your employees to continue to upgrade, upskill, and when they do that, if it adds value, pay them more. I mean, because it's quite difficult to tell an employee, go and train, upskill, then come back and I pay you exactly the same, and if he's learned something more, like if he hasn't and he doesn't add value, then fair enough. For those who have not done so well, it's a good question that you've raised. I think in the past, it was like, if you've not done so well, then that's it, that's the end of the line. What we've attempted to do with the Aspire recommendations is to ensure that there never is an end of the line. So even if you have dropped out, or even if you have not done so well, you should be able to somehow get back onto the ladder. And getting back could be in different ways. Some part of it may be coming back to the educational institution, but another way of doing it would be going to the WDA for their work skills qualifications programs and getting practical hands-on certification that allows them to get better jobs. I get quite a number of these at my Meet the People sessions because for some reason or other they have dropped out. Some drop out at secondary school, which is even more challenging because they don't even have the N-levels. And for those, I think the most suitable route would really be to go to WSQ. But there's some who have dropped out in the middle of ITE or in the middle of poly, and then for them it's just a question of can you get back into the system, and so which one. And it requires a bit of determination on their part, because by that time, very often they have got families and responsibilities, so they can't study full-time, which means that the part-time studying and support in terms of funding becomes very important. So that's what we're working towards.
Anyway, we have a room. Yeah, go ahead.
Minister, so you've mentioned the connection with industry, and my question really is, of course, you've had members of industry on the Aspire committee and you have them on the SkillsFuture Council. What has been the response of industry to what Aspire has said and what SkillsFuture will do? What is the connection between what you are trying to do in terms of setting out a skills framework with measures, for instance, like the progressive wage model? There seems to be resonance where you set out the skills you have to achieve in order to reach the next level in your career, and thereby that's associated with a certain wage level. I ask this because earlier on there was a question about needing to put in a minimum wage, and I think the government said that the orientation of this government is not to set in a minimum wage because that's just the floor, but the orientation is to implement the progressive wage model, which is a ladder. So how does what Aspire has set out to do sink in with that general thing? And then the third point is, of course, progressive wage models being applied to only 3 sectors as a compulsory regime. Do you envisage expanding that beyond in order to make, in order to give the Aspire recommendations more traction? I recognize that you're not the Labour chief, nor the MTI minister, nor whatever, but I mean, it's just what would you, what is your aspiration for the SkillsFuture Council, and really where the rubber hits the road, creating that traction for ITE graduates to progress. Finally, can I make a pitch for the book? There is a table in the book, table 9.6, which takes the data for just one cohort, the 2002 cohort, and tells you that while when they first started out, 72% of that cohort were in the skilled section, 28 moving upwards to the associate professional section, and of course none in the manager section yet. But in 2011, after 10 years, instead of 72% remaining at the skilled level, now that's only 38%. And the good news is that instead of just 28% at the associate professionals level, That's increased to 44%. And the even better news, as demonstrated by the alumni here, is that now, within the managers, working proprietors, and professional section, there's 18% of that cohort in that higher band. So I think it's only one cohort, but I think the room has recognized that ITE is not the end.
Well, actually, I think IT is very much a beginning, and a good beginning at that. Okay, you've got several questions. Let me see if I can take them in turn, and if I forget anything, just remind me at the end of it. Your first question was, what is the industry's response? I think overall, industry has been very enthusiastic about it because, one, as I said, they are crying out for skills, and they want people who can actually do real practical work. What they've told us is that they think it's less of an issue with the bigger companies because bigger companies have big HR departments and they are used to the concept of training. I think the challenge will come with the SMEs, not because they don't want to do this, but if you're a small SME, I mean, your first and most important priority is cash flow and making sure that you have enough people on the ground to do what you need to do. So you don't always have the guy to spare to do the mentoring for the interns or to do a sort of a special training program. And with each industry, it's industry specific. So I think it's become apparent that if you want to help those companies who are smaller, first you have to adopt a sectoral approach, meaning sector by sector, because different industries have different types of trainings. Then you've got to identify the commonalities, which probably means that the industry associations would have a much bigger role to play because they are the ones who would be in a position to identify what industry as a whole needs and also to project forward. This was something that we got from Australia when we went on a study visit to Australia to look at how they did their training. I don't think we can, their model is very complicated, so we did not, follow that. But what did come across clearly was that in terms of getting industries as a whole to train their workers, you need some kind of overarching body that's looking at it and extrapolating the industry needs and saying to the training institution, these are the kind of skills that are needed now. These are the kind of skills we think are going to be needed in 5 years' time. And this is what we need you to do to help us train them. And you could do it in different ways. In Australia, sometimes the trainer comes to the company if it's big enough and has a big enough critical mass. Or alternatively, a number of small companies will send their people to a common trainer. So industry response, generally good, but the practical part, the implementation, that may be a bit challenging. But I think they also recognize that it's a potential recruitment pipeline for them. So if they do it well, it will help to resolve a good part of their labor issues. Your second question was, what's the connection between the skills framework and the progressive wage model? Well, our recommendation was this: if you want people to climb up and to progress along the way, get promotions, get the wages, you have to give some kind of guideline. And at first, in Australia, they're sort of trying to do it across the board, all industries. When we looked at it, we actually realized you can't quite do that, because if somebody is a sushi chef, for example, how is that comparable to somebody who is working at Keppel Shipyard? You can't do a direct comparison. I mean, both might cut up things, but it's not quite the same. So you maybe precision, isn't it? One precision cutting. So we realized very quickly that if you're going to do a framework for people to climb, it has to go sector by sector. And one of the easiest sectors to start with was early childhood, because we've got the Early Childhood Development Agency, the polys and ITs are doing the training for that. MOE has started the MOE kindergarten. So we have some insight, and we're also able to participate in that. So we can start off with that. But it's an example of how you start as an educator, then you become a teacher, you become a principal, and what are the various progressions. But we also realize that you cannot go and fix the wages because you might just end up, unnecessarily interfering with the market. But at the same time, you want to give some sort of indicators so that people don't sort of hugely underpay or hugely overpay. So basically, a good framework should have what are the different levels through which you can progress, and what are the broad ranges of pay that are paid for each level, so people can take reference from that. And so employees will also know, because if I'm employed by this company and I'm being paid X dollars, if I go to another company and they offer me significantly under X, then I know that really I don't want to go there. And it gives both employers and employees a good frame of reference. Then your next question was about minimum wage. And that's an issue that comes up very often. Our view of minimum wage is that, well, it's one of those things which is like counterintuitive. On the face of it, it looks great. It seems very equitable, and it's like, how come you don't do this? But our sense of it is that it actually ends up not helping employees. A very simple example is this. Imagine you have a guy who has 2, let's say, kitchen assistants, each one earning $1,000. If you go to him and you say, I now mandate or legislate that you have to have a minimum wage of $1,500, and let's say he's barely breaking even, what is his response going to be? He's going to say, okay, now by law, I have to pay $1,500, and I can't afford $1,500 for 2 people, so I'm going to let one go. So one person may very well end up losing his job as a result of that. And we're trying to avoid that sort of situation. And we're also trying to avoid interfering with the market too much. But at the same time, we've also recognized that you also cannot let wages go too low, because people also do need to be supported. So that's why we adopted the workfare approach, which was really where the government tops up. And we top up at the CPF, and we top up partially in cash at regular intervals. So in that way, the employee still gets the money, but some of it goes into CPF, and only a certain portion is cash. In fact, when workfare was originally designed, there wasn't a cash component, and the feedback was that actually people need to have the cash, so that's why that was introduced later. So that's been our response to it, which we think works better. And then your other question was about how do you get the wages to increase, and that comes back to the point I made earlier about trying to make sure that you give value for the wages, and then putting in the framework with the wages pegged there so that it's a reference level, and hopefully the market will take guidance from there. And I think your other question was about 3 sectors where we've sort of started to do this. And the reason why we can't do all at one go is because there's so many sectors. So we're, as I mentioned earlier, we're taking a sectoral approach, but it will take quite a bit of time before we can go through all of the industries. So in typical Singapore parlance, slow by slow.
On that note, we have come to the end of our program for this morning. Aspire Skills Future is about the future. It's about aspirations.
Sorry, just a quick interruption there. I've got to tell you all about the Aspire and Skills Future, because it's so people wonder what's happened to Aspire, and then you're hearing about Skills Future. Yeah. Basically, what happened is this: Aspire was the committee that looked into the IT and poly studies, but when we made our recommendations, it was actually much broader. It was across the board, and it went really beyond just MOE involvement, because if you want to have lifelong learning, etc., it involves industries as well as manpower. Concurrently, at the same time, the Ministry of Manpower also produced its Continuing Education and Training Master Plan, or what we call the CET 2020, which basically So Aspire was really looking at it from the MOE angle, where you do the pre-employment training. The CET master plan was after you enter the workforce and what you're doing for the rest of your life. You put those two together, you get an entire continuum from the day you enter primary school to right up to the end of your life, where you're still learning things with your part-time learning and your continuing education. And the challenge is, how to implement this, because it is not just one ministry. It involves MOE, MTI, MOM, it involves private sector, and hence the idea to have a supervening council that basically takes this forward, implements some of the ideas, and it carries on with a life of its own. So that's the SkillsFuture Council, the one headed by DPM Tarman, and then you will have we have ministers from the three ministries, MOE, MTI, MOM, sitting on SkillsFuture Council. We've got private sector members. We've also got people from the educational institutions, because you need that holistic approach. And SkillsFuture is what will take it going forward. So we've rebranded Aspire, and CET 2020 has been rebranded to SkillsFuture. So going forward, we'll be using the SkillsFuture nomenclature. And let me just do my little plug for DPM. Just watch out for his budget speech. I think, you know, given that we've placed so much emphasis on SkillsFuture, you can expect to hear something about that.
We're going to hear a lot from that. Okay, thank you. You want to present the...
Please join me in thanking SMS Indranee Rajah again for taking the time to be with us and sharing her views. And thank you very much for sharing your comments and your views as well. Now, just give us a moment where we get ready for the happy moment of this event, which is the launch of the book. SMS, if you don't mind, we will relocate you for a minute.